So, good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to have you all here on today. I have tonight a very exciting guest and an awesome conversation that I am so happy we will get to have today. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Antoine Pierce for joining us for tonight's discussion. And on today, we are going to be talking about the necessity of the presence of Black culture in the media. In particular, we will be talking about shows like the 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 hit on Amazon Prime, Them. We've heard so many different things about people's perspective on shows like this that deal a lot with the history of Black culture. And so, I saw Antoine put up a post about wanting to have just a discussion about it. And I was like, oh my goodness. So I said, let me be bold and dive in and ask if I can ask him to come on the Black intellectualism movement to talk with us about it, because this is completely up my alley and something that I take great interest in. And he instantly said yes. So I'm so thankful that he is here with us tonight. And for those of you who do not know Antoine, I'm going to take a minute to introduce him. And then, of course, I'll allow him to share anything with us that he'd like. So, Antoine Pierce is a lifelong resident of Baton Rouge. Since his teen years, he has been a dedicated servant of his community. As one of seven children, Antoine grew up in a lower middle class home filled with love, wholesome Christian values, and an emphasis on the importance of education that as a parent he upholds today. His modest upbringing inspired him to obtain his education from LSU Baton Rouge, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Child and Family Studies and a Master of Public Administration with a concentration in public policy. His entrepreneurial spirit and desire to give back to his community inspired him to establish the Better Boys Initiative Incorporated, a nonprofit organization that uses the arts to develop character and bolster self-esteem among minority and underserved young men throughout Baton Rouge. Antoine served on Mayor President Sharon Westenbroom's transition subcommittee for the Office of Community Development. He currently serves as an appointee of Governor John Bell Edwards to his advisory board for juvenile justice and delinquency prevention. Antoine believes that his efforts in our community will instill a sense of pride, self-worth, and determination in the youth, which he hopes he will inspire them set goals and pursue their dreams. This work reflects his commitment to the use of innovation and creativity to spur economic growth of our state. Antoine is a musician, actor, writer, and a lover of the arts. Throughout his life and travels, he has had many opportunities to meet and converse with diverse groups of people. Antoine credits his interactions with people of all walks of life and socioeconomic backgrounds for his genuine compassion for all people. Antoine is a member of the Louisiana Association of Nonprofit Organization. He is the founder and director of Better Boys Initiative Incorporated, a delegate of the Urban Congress on African American Boys in Baton Rouge, and a fellow in the fifth cohort of the Urban Leadership Development Initiative. He is a Phi Sigma Theta Honor Society member and a statewide organizer for the Youth Your Voice Matters Tour. Excuse me, I get a little tongue tied when I get excited. And I wanted to read the entire introduction because, first of all, it was just the two of us, so that gave me the time to do more than 10 to 15 lines. But number two, I also wanted to kind of reflect the fact that you have had such a wide journey of experience. And in addition to that, you are not just a talker, you are a doer. So the Better Boys Initiative in particular was very exciting for me to read about, because so many of our young Black boys do need positive examples. And to be quite honest with you, especially in a state like Louisiana, where we tend to see a lot of highlights on the negative and not as much on the positive. And so that one-on-one interaction with our young males is so vital and important. And I wanted to make sure to be able to share that. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you before we even get started and say, is there anything I missed? Is there anything you'd like to say?
No, you covered it all. I mean, definitely where I grew up. I'm a proud graduate of Estruma High School. I should have put that in there too. That dirty, affectionately known as that dirty. But where I grew up, one of the things that I found to be sorely missing, and I don't want to buy into the stigma of the absent father, because that's not really a reality. It's sort of one of those truisms that perpetuated on our community, but they're not. It's not a reality for most young Black people. But there is a sore gap for mentorship in our community for sure. Young men kind of having to find their own way.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of my motivation for creating an outlet, because I found an outlet in the arts, and I wanted to give that outlet to other people, because I know how great it was for me to utilize that as an outlet to express myself and to kind of step away from reality and do my own thing. So that's what I wanted to utilize it as, and I found that as I teach it to other people and mentor them, they're able to express themselves creatively, and rather than turning to violence or other means, they can express themselves through writing or performing arts or singing or whatever way they choose to do it in a peaceful way, in a productive way.
Yes, yes, yes. I first want to say that it's so ironic that you say that you went to Ostroma, because Ostroma, aka the Dirty Eye, is the first school where I started my teaching career. So
Wow.
our
Wow.
commonality. And Ostroma is the reason that I decided to remain in education for 13 years. So it was a very, very special place for me, very special experience. And I still keep in touch with a lot of my students from Ostroma. So I understand the affection and the love. It was a great place.
Yes,
Um,
it was.
so, so let's go ahead and get into tonight's discussion. And um, as we said before, the conversation is wide open. At the time when you and I first talked, I had only watched, I think, one episode of them. And because I had heard about it. And it was so crazy because now I'm actually one of the people who is constantly on Amazon Prime watching everything, all the biographies, everything. And I found out about the show Them through social media. So I started watching, and then after you and I conversed, I was like, okay, so I got to make sure I catch up on my episodes. And I'll just say I looped back around and started watching it again because the content is so heavy and so deep.
Yeah.
First of
Yeah.
all, I felt like I was watching unwritten Toni Morrison books. That's number one. Where every time you watch it, you see something different and you connect the dots and you connect the lessons, and it's just an ongoing experience with each episode. So before we dive in too deep to the content, I think we need to start first by talking about um, how we got to the necessity for this conversation. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, how are history-based shows relevant and important to today's society? And I'm talking about in particular Black history and Black culture, because that's of course our focus here.
Well, sorry. I mean, first of all, if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. I think it's important, especially now, as we watch across the country, what's happening in the legislatures across the country, especially in Louisiana. We saw one of our state legislators say that we need to teach the good and the bad of slavery. So at the end of the day, it's important for us to keep in perspective. It's important for us to keep in focus, not what's taught to us as revisionist history, but the reality that people in this country, minorities, particularly African Americans in this country, have had to endure and had to experience. So we should always keep that in the forefront. We don't live in a post-racial society. We are not exempt now from the woes of racism in this country. As a matter of fact, we are deep in the toils of racism in this country. It has not disappeared. It has only gotten worse. And being really exacerbated by the laws, by the policies that are being passed, the voter suppression policies that are being passed after Joe Biden beat the brakes off of Donald Trump. Then the response was that we have to do something now. We can't have a minority in this country raise up and actually have full rights,
Mm-hmm.
actually be able to avail themselves of their constitutional rights. So I think that television, TV, movies, sitcoms, or whatever it is, I think it's important for them to keep always in focus where we come from. Because if you don't know where we came from, you can't know where we're going. So I think it's important for us to keep that in focus at all times, and that's why the TV shows and the movies and those types of things are so important.
It's so interesting that you talk about, you brought up the suppression of voters' rights. Um, and I'll say that it has been so almost traumatizing for me to watch us go back to a place in history that I thought we would never have to visit again. And that's where currently we are literally fighting to protect the voting rights of minorities. Um, and the whole idea that it's the same tactic over and over again. It is the manipulation of rhetoric that people often don't pay attention to or don't understand. And so when I had the chance to sit down and read some of the different bills that are being proposed across states, I just thought about how it is like history has come back around. And if you do not know, like you said, where our people came from, how the issues with voter rights got put into place, because we see the marches and the protests and all these things, and so often people think that the marches and the protests are the only component of what there was. They don't really understand how the rhetoric of things is really the bigger picture of this. So what people claim that they get tired of quite often is, oh, the idea of the march, the idea of the fight, or the idea of the hangings. But the problem is that a lot of people don't necessarily see or understand or pay attention to the content around that. What conversations are being had that lead up to those moments. And so we end up sitting back at tables where we should not have any reason to be sitting here during this moment concerned about whether people are about to restrict voting rights, and in some states have already passed amendments to bills to restrict voting rights. We should not have to be sitting here trying to figure out if our state is going to be next, or could this become a national thing. So when you make that point, it strikes such a nerve, because it's absolutely true that we do have to know about history. So I'm gonna kind of deviate for a second then and ask you, um, so how do you think, why is it so important that we have these, because we've done the nonfiction and then we have the fiction. And what I tend to find is that people get more into the fiction version than they do the nonfiction. Shows like them, and even the one that was on Netflix, Country. What, I forgot the name of it because I didn't get to see that one at all. But the other show they had a few months ago on Netflix,
Yeah,
everybody was talking about the. I mean,
Lovecraft Country, I think it was called
Lovecraft Country.
something
And
like that. Yeah,
yeah, Lovecraft Country was it. And I heard, and I'm actually not a Netflix, so that was my whole thing. I'm like, well, I don't have Netflix, so I didn't get to see it. But I do plan to actually go back, because now people have still brought it up. And after I watched them, now I want to for sure go back. But the interesting part was people started talking about the Green Book. They started talking about restrictions. They started talking about voting laws. All of these things that came from a fictional depiction when we have had real life stories. So I want to ask you, why do you think that the fictionalized version of things tend to appeal to people so much more than the real life stories we hear? Because we get a lot of biographies and autobiographies of people, but they don't always seem to appeal the same.
Oh, so there's such a broad answer to a lot of that. The whole time you were talking, I was thinking about um, back in the '80s, and I'm an '80s baby, but I remember when the Cosby Show first started airing, and a lot of the critics' pushback about the show wasn't the acting or the casting. It was the idea that no one would ever believe that Black families live this way. That that you can have a Black family that lives in an upper middle class, upper class lifestyle with a doctor as the dad, a lawyer as the mom, you know, highly successful kids. No one would ever believe this, but they'll definitely believe good times. That a Black family lived in the ghetto, in the projects,
Woo!
scraping and surviving. So I think what you've seen over time is a perpetuation of this sort of narrative about Black people. So I think Black people are desperate, in a lot of senses, especially as it pertains to the arts, to see us in a light that we know to be realistic, but that Hollywood seems to not want to elevate us to. So uh, I was thinking about Star Wars too. You know, when the first time we saw uh, the Black guy on Star Wars, that Star Wars episode, the young Black British actor, I can't think of his name right now, but that episode of Star Wars did better than any of the others. Look at
Mm-hmm.
Black Panther. Black Panther outsold most movies in this country, not just its genre, but most movies. Black people want to see us in lights that we already see ourselves. We see ourselves as superheroes. We see ourselves as great fathers, as saviors of our community. Um, and we want to be painted in that light. We don't want to be painted as thugs and gangsters and slaves and
Yeah.
and hoodlums and drug dealers. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's that's a narrative that I think the movie industry wants to perpetuate because people buy into that. But that's not who we are on a larger scale. So I
Yeah.
think that Black people are drawn to the superhero characters, the Marvel characters, the ones that paint us in a positive light because we're desperate to see ourselves like that on the big screen. And rightfully so. We should see ourselves in the realities.
Mm-hmm.
That there was nothing unrealistic about having a doctor as a dad and a lawyer as a mom. But why would white Hollywood and the critics believe that? Because they think that Black people can only identify with the struggle, and that's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
We have PTSD from the struggle. We don't want anything to do with the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
We're struggling because we have to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not struggling because we choose to. Um, I think black people just want peace and fairness and justice in this country. We don't want anything more than that. We don't want to be given more than we should have. We want to be given what we should have.
Yes.
So
Yes.
and it be a natural in the natural order of things in this country and not having to fight every single day to achieve those things. So that's why I think it's important to see images that Black people are more drawn to those sort of made up images that give us a chance to step away from the realities of life as African Americans in this country and give us a chance to kind of live a go to a whimsical imaginary place like Wakanda just for a second where
But
everything is great, you know.
which is crazy because Wakanda was only a superhero version of who we actually are as well. And I could go on and on about that. And that might be our point for tonight, but so you're actually very right about that. You made me think about something when you talked about how when the Cosby Show came out, people did not see it as very realistic that there could be a Black family with a mother and father in the home, with an attorney and a doctor, successfully raising children. I'm reading Cicely Tyson's autobiography right now, and it is absolutely wonderful. As a matter of fact, I was actually supposed to tweet earlier how I feel that her autobiography, unfortunately, the loss of her overshadowed the release of her autobiography because her life story is mind blowing. Her story is it's just absolutely. She has had me glued to this book. But she talked about how when the movie Sounder came out in the 70s, which was actually filmed here in Louisiana. And she was traveling the country to promote the movie. And she said on two occasions, one with a white guy, and I think one was a black woman, where they told her that they found the movie sounded very interesting because they could not believe that they were seeing positive love and affection between a black man and black woman. They couldn't believe that they were seeing a black man in the house in the 70s with
Mm-hmm.
his family and with this couple showing love and compassion toward each other in the 70s. And she says in that same book that it is ironic that we are, and this woman ends up passing away and says that here we are right back around in history at that same spot I thought we'd never be.
Mm.
As she goes to her childhood and she talks about all the different types of struggles they faced and some of the trauma she experienced growing up that was race related. It brings us right back to this same place where we are right now. So when you talk about how people really couldn't see us as being successful in movies or happy or joyful, not in a yes or massa type of way, but as human beings, it's just it's so real and so true. Because she said out of her own mouth that this is what made the entire journey uncomfortable, because here she was thinking that she would be able to just showcase this movie as this warm and touching movie. It says she had people that were perplexed by the idea that black folks show each other love and affection. like it was something alien in them. And
You
right
know,
now, it's the same way. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
oh no, it makes you it makes you really think, what images have people seen of us?
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, what are people's realities of Black people? And I think I mean, the conversation is finding itself in a much full circle, in a full circle way. Um, I think that's why it's so important to have that balance. It's so important for us to have to show all of our experiences, not just the the whimsical, imaginary experience, but also the realities
Mm-hmm.
of Black existence in
Mm-hmm.
this country. The realities of, and not even necessarily self-imposed realities, but those that have been imposed on us.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to show that too, because you almost can't have one without the other one. There would be no need for us to escape if there was not something to run from. So we wouldn't need a magical place to go if we were not subjected to trauma in our waking lives. So I think it's important for us to be able to see those images, and not necessarily for us, because we're not the only ones watching these films like
Mm-hmm.
them and us. These very cerebral and deeply thought out films. We're not the ones that are just. We're not the only ones watching this. So I think it's important for our
Mm-hmm.
stories to be told to people so that they can at least get a glimpse of some of the things, because
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to sit back in your home and not, it's out of sight, out of mind. If you're unaffected by it, you're unchanged by it. It doesn't matter if you,
Mm-hmm.
there were people in the 1960s that could not understand why Black people were so angry,
Mm-hmm.
because they were unaffected by the realities and the things that people were being subjected to. So I
Yes.
think if you see it and it's kind of laid out in your lap, you have two options. You can accept it and then act on it, or you can deny it and say, oh, this isn't real. This can't be the case.
Yep.
But either
Yep.
way, it's there for you to make a choice about what you're going to do. And a lot of people choose to deny it because they don't want to have to take responsibility for changing it,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't believe they can, which is another conversation. But yeah, I think the film industry, the movie industry, books, whatever it's important that it has a healthy balance. I'm not saying make it all this sort of deep, dark, traumatic thing, but I think you have to tell those stories because they'll get lost, they'll get changed, they'll get revised. We'll be
Mhm.
told the story of American exceptionalism and not told the story of Jim Crow and slavery in this country and bigotry and racism and redlining and all the things that we've been subjected to in this country since its inception. So it's important to have that balance.
Well, exactly what you said. Like, if we don't tell our own story, then other people get to tell a version of it that they want us to see, which we have seen for many years. If we think back to um, um, the movies where they had the Bojangles characters, right? And they were able to create this image of the jovial black person who loved working in the fields and, who fit all these stereotypical behaviors because we did not have an outlet to share our own stories, to let the world know what the real truth looks like. So you're absolutely right in that respect. And, you just did such a perfect segue. So I'm going to bring the question back around, even though you've already touched on it, and see if we can dig a little bit deeper into
Sure.
question number 2, which is why do you feel why do you think people feel that Black history based movies and shows don't have a place in today's society? Because every time, when we had Nate Parker's when he came out with the story of and I had to type in my head just now, but when he came out with
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation, I'm sorry, a few years ago, we saw the same thing. There was a lot of feedback about them. People were like, well, why do we have to go back to the 50s? I'm like, we don't even have, in particular, we've seen movies, and this is a problem that I have, okay, and we'll come back to this. And I did a couple of TikToks about this as well. We talk about racism as it relates to the South, and people in this country treat racism like it's a Southern thing, and I feel that it's a form of escapism. But we do not address how racism is a part of this entire country, and that there are places all over this country where this behavior is exhibited. Therefore, when I saw them and realized that it was about a Black family who left the South and then goes to where they think life is supposed to be better and realize that it's just as bad, if not worse. Because it went from being, solely physical to physical, psychological. It was just the same thing. It just changed form. So my question is, why is it that you feel people don't think that there's a place for these movies in today's society, despite the fact that, in my opinion, I feel we're still learning so much?
I mean, I think it goes back to what I was saying initially, and that's just that because I read a lot of the negative reviews, I read a lot of the criticism right after, because I binge watched the series, and then I posted about it on social media, and a lot of the people that commented on my post were white people. I would say 99% of them were white people that commented saying that it really made them step back and examine their own bias, examine their own deeply held ideas that they thought growing up was normal. And then they look at what people were subjected to, what Black people were subjected to all over this country. Because racism isn't inherently a deep South thing. It's inherently a US thing.
Yes.
It's inherently in the DNA of the country in general. George Floyd was killed in Minnesota. Exactly. So we're not talking about, it's not a deep South thing. So, and he wasn't the only one. Dante Wright killed in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's everywhere.
Colorado. And know that there are many issues in this state in particular with race and culture. New Jersey had several sundown towns. New York has sundown towns, and still have places today where people know you cannot travel. So you're right. Continue. You're right.
But what I think people are, what the critics were saying is that this is struggle porn. This is exacerbating the PTSD experienced by Black people in this country. Watching ourselves or looking at our history, and some of us understanding our history and understanding the trauma that comes from that, and then having to watch it replay on TV time and time again. And what their concern was not that this wasn't art reflecting life. Their concern was the commercialization of this art, saying that it's taking our struggle and making a prime series out of it, making money off of it, making sponsorship dollars off of it, putting this out and re-traumatizing people, re-exposing them to trauma. But you re-expose yourself to trauma walking out of your front door. Unless you walk around with your eyes closed.
Right.
Uh,
Look, I'm not trying to be ugly or stereotypical, but I know people who have gone out to the club, a shooting occurred, and you go back 2 weeks later, and
right.
or you go
Right.
to the same bar that you've been going to for 45 years, and there have been stabbings in the parking lot. And so for me, and that's not everybody, of course, but I tend to hear it come from people who do not apply the same concept across the board to every experience. I don't hear our older folks say that we hear too much about it. You understand what I'm saying? It tends to be a population. Honestly, a lot of our younger people talk more about not wanting to hear these stories as often. But as I watch them, you're still learning so much. There's so much that you haven't been told or taught. So my question becomes, is it re-traumatizing, or is it not wanting to know what happened? Because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, but I think a lot of these people are hypocrites. So well, it's true. If you didn't see our stories
Yes.
being projected, you remember Oscar So White? You remember that?
Yes. Yes.
If you didn't see the acclaim for the realities of our existence, for our stories, then people would be complaining about that.
Yep.
You can't have it both ways. Either you want people to have to face, and let's keep in mind, this is not just for us.
Mm-hmm.
This is for everybody who wants to watch. And some people have the privilege of living their lives being unaffected by the realities that Black people have faced every single day and still face. We're not talking about the civil rights movement. We're talking about 2021.
Yes.
Still facing to this day.
Yeah.
For some people, it's their first time even having to recognize the emotional trauma that the systemic issues that persist in our country. So absolutely, we have to keep telling these stories. Is it hard to watch? Yes, but that's the point.
Mm-hmm.
That is the point. The point is, it's supposed to make you uncomfortable.
Yes.
If you're uncomfortable watching it, imagine the people who had to endure it and still do.
Yes. Yeah.
So you get a little taste of the trauma that they experience having to watch it. But it doesn't compare to what they have to experience living it. But I hope that it makes you act in a core. I hope it changes your perspective. And that's what these types of movies like them is about. It's about changing your perspective, because like you said, this movie was set back in the 40s and 50s. But all of the issues that they covered in the film we're still talking about redlining. Matter of fact, Wells Fargo had to issue an apology for giving people subprime mortgages, and not only that, but disallowing African American applicants to apply for homes in certain communities. This is not 1965. We're talking about 2000.
Yep.
So people are still subjected to a lot of the issues that they covered in that movie, and I think it's important for us to keep those things at the forefront. Because we can watch the superhero movie. I love all that stuff. I'm a Star Wars head. I'm a Marvel head and DC head. That's fine. But I also think that we have to keep in perspective our realities, or they'll be rewritten for us.
Yes.
We'll be told that America is an exceptional place, and you have no right to complain. We'll be told that accountability is cancel culture. We'll be told that you can't call somebody racist unless you're canceling them. You're trying to silence them. But you know where we'll be told that at? On every major network.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll go on every platform on
Woo!
YouTube,
Yeah.
Facebook, CNN, Fox News, and say you're silencing me.
Well, because the thing is, if we don't keep applying pressure, like, and you're right, the application of pressure in recent years has caused many of people who were once silent to become more vocal. I think about the Juneteenth movement last year, and honestly, I felt some kind of way because I feel, as a person who I have a lot of family in Texas, and my grandmother started teaching me about Juneteenth at a young age. And it was always one of those things where I kind of appreciated the underdogism of Juneteenth because it made me feel even more proudful that our people celebrated the beauty of each other. But honestly, the pressure that Black people and people who learned more about history and culture, who united with us, continue to put on society, forced this country last year to say, hey, we need to give Juneteenth some of the same type of energy that we give the 4th of July. So what you're saying is 100% true. We love the phrase apply pressure, but this is one of the areas where we must always apply pressure because you're right. If we back down, it will go back to a situation where people's voices are not heard. And to me, Antoine, it's like, if you don't have the facts to back it up, it's like a research paper, then people will always try to deny whether or not it existed or whether it's true. And so by continuously engaging in conversations about it, in a sense, we keep that accountability on the table by saying, this is it, this is the proof, this has happened. And that's kind of interesting because it takes my mind to a whole nother conversation when we had somebody who was asking us about school textbooks. And they were like, one of the problems we have when we have the conversation up is they're always questioning the credibility of it. And I say, just because a non-Black person has not written it in a textbook does not make it false when we have plenty of evidence. So what you're saying is, it's so true because, in a sense, syria is what we have for the things that textbooks do not give our kids yet, for the things that textbooks have not given our adults yet, for the things that textbooks may not give our schools for another 10 years or so. You're absolutely right about why it is so important for us to ensure that we keep the pressure going.
You know, as we speak, there are states that are passing policies to rewrite the textbooks to say that slaves were employed in America.
And indentured.
Employees.
Indentured.
Well-treated enslaved people. I'm sorry, if you're holding me against my will, forcing me to work for free, there's no well treatment about it. Right. I don't care how much you feed me, but at the end of the day, that's what's happening. We're talking about textbooks full of revisionist history, glorifying the Confederacy and downplaying the racism and bigotry that they were, the slavery that they were trying to perpetuate. Right. Again, in the state of Louisiana, they're trying to pass policies that say that we can only talk about American exceptionalism and racism is taboo. Let's pretend that
people don't know this. It was tweeted. I posted it on social media. It was in the news, and there are a lot of people that do not know that they are trying to get history books revised right now. So I don't mean to interrupt you, but can you reemphasize that again, because people don't get that this is going on right now.
All over the country, there are white supremacist organizations, and that's what I call them. They're white nationalists, white supremacists, America First organizations all across this country that are seeking to rewrite history, revise history, bring back the days of the Confederacy. The South will rise again, and downplay the enslavement of Africans in this country, and say that they came over as employees, and then try to tell you that We live in a post-racial society, and that racism is a figment of Black people's imagination. That we don't have to contend with the issues of racism. You have everything. You live in a society where you have full rights. Why are you still complaining? Meanwhile, they pass voter suppression laws to silence you. Meanwhile, they refuse to give you loans so that you can get a house in a neighborhood that's not integrated yet.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, they push us to schools that underfund our community schools, underfund our public schools, predominantly in African American communities, and then ask you to your face, I don't see what the problem. I tell you to your face, I don't see what the problem is. Why are you so upset? Why are Black people so angry? Sure, you can't walk down the street. You can't sell loose cigarettes. You can't go to the grocery store. You can't sit in your backyard. You can't walk down your own street. You can't stop at a convenience store. But I don't see what the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to stay vigilant about these things. We have to stay abreast. Anybody that says politics doesn't apply to me, to them is delusional. I can point to every aspect of your life and show you how the politics of the day are connected. As we speak again, they're trying to pass policies that say that America is exceptional and racism is a bygone era. They don't even want racism taught in classrooms, bigotry taught in classrooms. So these young people who are growing up, that if they don't do their own research or be taught by their parents or grandparents or whoever their mentors are about the realities of this country, they'll grow up believing that the sun shines every day, until they're subjected to it.
I was about to say, and I won't share too much of this story personally because I want her to come on and share it eventually herself. I have a couple of people in my life who had that experience, a couple, and where when they got older, they had encounters to realize that we have really created this world protection and love and teaching you. And one thing I try to tell, a lot of especially Black teens is that by nature, the Black community has always taught our children that you love and you show kindness to others. You don't judge people by the color of their skin and things like that. But in a lot of cases, everybody is not taught the same thing as you. And so as you get older, the way that people perceive you or view you is going to change. Just know that you cannot allow that to make you a bitter or sour person. That kind of brings us back around to why the media is so important, because there are some lessons that unfortunately will not be taught by parents, that will not be taught by our school system, that we must learn by people who have the ability and the access to money and stream time and television time to bring these lessons to us. And that is done through shows like them and movies like Us and all these other types of shows that are coming out now. And I have to tell people all the time, what you said earlier about how people say, well, you're monetizing this and they're getting profit off of it. Well, who do you want to get profit? Would you rather a person get money off a false story or off the truth? Number one. Number two, if people are putting in the type of work that something demands, don't they deserve to be compensated properly? Let's talk about the earning gap. Because it takes us right to another problem. As Black people are already struggling to be paid in equal amounts, and then we want to complain about people being able to monetize true stories about their own heritage. Do we want other people? Because no, people don't get as upset about Target selling Black history clothes anymore. But we want to complain about our own people telling our story and being able to make an income from it. So if anybody's going to be able to monetize, we didn't get 40 acres and a mule, but this is an opportunity for some producers, some writers, some screenplay developers to get access to something that could propel us forward culturally as well as help us financially. And so I think that so much about it is also our perspective. And sometimes it goes back to what you said earlier about how we have seen ourselves. So often it seems to me, Antoine, that it's almost like, can we find any satisfaction in the things that some of our people are trying to do to move forward? And how do we reshape the vision of ourselves Cinema is the first way we do that, right? Because if we keep showing the images, keep giving the messages, keep putting it into our heads, eventually, hopefully, we start to see things in a different way. But if we take that away, then what happens? We no longer get repeated access to seeing
To
life
see like
be told, to see these lessons in the way that they should be told. We heard, think about the picture that was painted so long of Malcolm X being, like a monster and a radicalist and all this. And he may have been more extreme than some people preferred. But when we had the chance to really hear the story about this man who, first of all, not only, was he just this Muslim man, but actually went to prison and experienced a transformation that helped put his life on the right path. And every time I watch that movie, I always think to myself, wow, and this man started off as a person who was on a pathway to prison and could have been, a repeat offender for the rest of his life, but turned it around and ended up making a big impact on humanity. So why is it that we often don't see that aspect of 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 each other, um, instead of seeing what we have unfortunately been conditioned to believe, which is, why do we have to see the same storylines over and over instead of seeing these stories that should be building us up even more as people and helping us to see ourselves in a different light? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I had so many thoughts as you were speaking. I would really love to see the critics of shows like them and us. I would really love to see their opinion of the Housewives reality shows, um, or the Love and Hip Hop reality shows. And I say that because um, it seems, like I said, I think a lot of these folks are just hypocrites, because it seems to me that you're perfectly fine with Andy Cohen and these major executives on these
Yes.
predominantly white ran production companies, multi-million dollar, perhaps billion-dollar traded production companies, um, exploiting the every negative stereotype about us in general, as opposed to seeing, I mean, for the sake of making television and ratings,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to seeing our stories told in their realest form.
Right.
Um, so you're okay with this as a form of entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
seeing us paraded out and mocked, as opposed to us to showing the realities of our existence.
Wow.
But I just think it's incredible that what we find fault in as a people, and some of it I also think is parroting the dominant culture, because that's what happens when you are oppressed, when you are subjugated, when you are held down for so long and only shown, you almost becoming brainwashed, for lack of better words, when you are only shown images, negative images of you. All you see on TV is slavery. All you see on TV of yourself is thugs and gangsters and hoodlums and stuff, and not necessarily Dr. King. I'm glad I said that. I encourage everybody to watch. If you haven't seen the documentary, "I Am Not Your Negro," James
Yeah.
Baldwin.
Yeah.
Watch
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
documentary. "I Am Not Your Negro," James Baldwin's documentary. At the
Mm-hmm.
very beginning of the documentary, he talked about his experience with Malcolm X and Dr. King. He said he traveled with both of them. He talked to both of them personally. He wrote about both of them. And one thing that he found was that they both, first of all, they both died very young. I don't think either one of them was 40 by the time they died, very young. But what he also found was that at first they were on polar ends of the discussion. But by the time they died, because they both had very short lives, by the time they died, you could not tell one message from the other. And I thought that was so profound, because what I think what happens, they both were, they wanted the same things, but
Yeah.
they both also saw the realities of living in America,
Mm-hmm.
and their approach began to converge.
Mm-hmm.
Some would say Dr. King became more radical, and Malcolm X became a little less
It
radical.
always got in the middle,
He
it was
kind,
in the middle type of thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we have to have, and I think it goes right back to saying we have to have that balance. We have to be able to see our stories be told and the realities of our stories. Even if it's hard to watch, it should be hard to watch.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any conscience, if you have any heart as a human being, you have to be touched, especially when these are true stories, when they're based on true stories that actually happen to people.
Yeah.
You and it forces you to reevaluate your perspective, as it should, you know. And I think that's why these types of movies, these types of films have to continue, because they tell a relevant story, and it's not painting us in a negative light. It's not. An enormous amount of strength to be able to endure that thing and still live on your life,
Yeah.
and be successful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So we would go all day in this segment of the discussion because it's so big and it's so important and it's so powerful. But we will not get particularly into them. So I'm going to segue to the next question.
yeah, yeah,
But that's such an important part, and I'm glad we were able to talk about the necessity of us and our story before we even get into how really awesome this show is. And how important it is. Because I think that in order to convince others to get on board with watching shows like this and others and supporting them, we really do need to address some of the biases, the struggles, the emotional trauma, the societal problems that existed then and that still exist now, and the necessity of us rethinking how we can support a black cinema across the board, not just the ones that make us feel good, not just the hero movies, not just everything that gives us the love connection vibe or makes us feel that we're getting an Americanized view. We have to look at all different genres, right? If I'm waiting for the day that we get a black science fiction movie out. I saw last night they had a black hero show that came on, and my son was, I mean, just absolutely, it was a black female superhero. I'm going to find the name of it. It was my first time seeing it. My son
wow,
was glued to the TV, and I was so excited for him to see it. It was not an all black station. It was a diverse station, but they had a majority black cast for this show, and including a black female superhero. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is something we've never seen. And watching my son glued to this show, something outside of cartoon, something outside Disney Channel that, you know, didn't have a lot of violence or anything to it, but was very entertaining and also gave him a different perspective on what superheroes look like. They can look like me. They can look like my mom. They can look like people I know. It's very important. So let's go to the questions. Let's talk about the show Them. We're talking about themes, imagery, symbolism, representation, the whole nine. I'm going to let you start, and I'm just going to flow with you because I loved it.
me too, me too, absolutely. And again, the themes in them were intentionally hard to watch,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
as they should be. But I think my answer to the critics is that it didn't paint us in a negative light.
mm-mm,
It showed our realities, and in reality, and the protagonists, I should say the antagonists in this movie were them, literally. And I encourage people to go and watch the series. It's rough,
it
but
is very
it
rough.
the series takes so many different turns. I mean, it talks about some of the things that a lot of Black people don't really talk about, and that's the spiritual trauma, the
Mm-hmm,
emotional trauma. It talks about it takes a sort of esoteric turn in some parts of it, talking about how people were influenced by their ideas, by their ideology, by their religion
Mm-hmm.
to commit atrocities towards Black people, and
Yes.
how that has both been in their DNA as well as ours, because trauma by its very nature can be passed down.
Yep.
And we don't even realize in a lot of cases where our feelings come from about certain things, or why we're traumatized about certain things, or why we respond in a certain way. But if you start looking back in your family history, if you start looking back in your ancestry, you'll start finding the root causation.
Yes.
And this movie kind of it covers a lot of bases in 10 episodes, I believe it is. So it talks about it takes it all the way back to
I'm thinking when you're
mhm.
talking about the religion, if you don't mind, that last episode, where they end up getting stranded in and it kind of explains to us how you end up with this man that's haunting the area as well. Because what we assume is that before there was Compton, it used to be this town of religious people. And even how you had one person that did not agree, but you had a whole town that was you had three different levels. You had one, and it I gotta throw it in there. It reminded me of what I write about in Tracks. You have three different groups. You have the one that's standing alone who doesn't agree with what's going on. You have the adamant ones who are outright open with their racism, and then you have the one that's kind of in the middle, and in the end feels like I didn't want it to go this far type of situation. So I figured that's what you were talking about. So I wanted to just throw that out there. The episode 10 is where we really get to see, or I think that was episode 10, the last one, where we get to see that kind of unfold. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, so there were a lot of episodes. As a matter of fact, I don't know if it was on the last episode, or one of the ones before that. But the guy in the black hat, when he approached her in the I think she was still in the hospital in the psych ward.
Mm-hmm.
And if you listen to what he's saying, it's so deep. He said basically that I'll always make you do this to yourselves. He said, I'll get in your heads. I will use any means necessary to make it what I can't do to you, I'll make sure you do to yourselves.
Yes,
I
I
said,
remember that.
ooh,
Yep, yep,
that's deep.
yep.
That is deep.
That's that
And then
emotion.
I started thinking about the policies that are now Louisiana uh is seeking to pass. I think it already passed one side. Gun legislation that allows for gun owners to carry concealed weapons without a concealed permit.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Now,
yes.
who do you think
Yep, yep.
that is going to impact? I said, man, that is so deep. And then you look at the imagery that you see you hear in the music, you see on TV. I mean, constantly, you're in a trance almost, seeing violence towards us, seeing not perpetuated our own hands, a glorification of violence
Mm-hmm.
from us toward each other. This sort of gangster mentality, killing each other for nothing. And I said, where does that come from? Who's benefiting from this? How do they, why would they pay you to put this in your music? And so what if it's your reality? I get it, because one of the things that Ice Cube said was, he was like, well, this is just people telling their stories about their realities. But you're getting paid to do this. There's somebody who doesn't live this experience that owns that label, that's putting money in your pocket to
That's a
keep
very
your
good
people in a trance. Oh my God. When I saw that part, I said, he said, it doesn't matter if I do it to you or not. I'll make sure I'll use any method I have to make sure you do it to yourselves.
Well, and I
You
think
know,
that's also when we started talking about the redlining, right? Because when you put a bunch of people in one area where some groups are struggling, some groups are not struggling, but they're in the same area, then you have what conflict among people. because you have, folks trying to make it, folks trying to survive. I thought about even the emotional aspect of it, right? When you have people that feel stressed, even if we think about the mom, right, and how the whole family started to fall apart because of the trauma the family had experienced. While she may not have initially spoken of it, didn't even fully tell the story to her kids, but the trauma of the situation was destroying them all, both the mother and the father, right? When they came back to America, when the dad comes back after he's been in the military, thinking that it's going to be easy for him and his family to start a new life, they put on a strong face for the public, but inside the home, everybody was falling apart while the neighborhood just laughed. So I saw, like, my mind went in just a million different ways when he made that statement, because it was like, what are the many different ways that the laws and practices and habits in this country have continued to disenfranchise and break apart Black people physically as well as emotionally and psychologically. And we're just getting to the point where we can start to have real conversations about how trauma has affected Black people generationally. For a long time, everybody else's trauma was discussionable or discussion worthy, except for ours. It was okay for everybody to go talk to the therapist, except for what Black people had been through, and what we had experienced in this country was truthfully the most violent and the most long-standing. And we're just getting to the point where we can begin to not even talk about the real diagnosis associated with trauma, but even talk about the fact that there are some people who are still suffering generationally because of what happened to their grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, going all the way back. So when that statement was made, my mind just went, how many different avenues are there where he has been able to ensure that if I don't hurt you, I'll fix it so you can hurt yourself? So many, and you're so right.
Man, so I was thinking about our school system a lot, especially in Louisiana. A lot of the poor communities the schools are underfunded.
Yes.
So if you have underfunded schools, you have programs that are not funded, the quality of the books far less than their white counterparts. So therefore, the educational outcomes will be lower. What do you think is going to happen to that generation? You disinvest in their communities, so you put stumbling blocks in their way. You don't allow for revitalization of their communities. You take their tax dollars and spend them across town in another community where they don't live. They don't see a reinvestment in their own communities. What do you think is going to happen to those people? Where do they go? Right. And then you deprive them of a quality education. You deprive them of wages to be able to provide for themselves. You won't pay them a living wage. The health care is abysmal at best. So what do you think? What do you think is going to be the response? What do you think is going to happen? But this is intentional. I say this all the time. The system isn't broken. The system isn't broken. It's working the way it was designed. It's working perfectly for the people at the very top. It's working perfectly for people who are unaffected by the trauma of racism and bigotry in this country. Yeah. It's working for them. That's how it was designed. It isn't broken. Yeah. It's working perfectly. It's just not working for everyone.
I think that's why, once again, we go back to why shows like them are so important, because I think about the ongoing lessons I continue to pull from there as an English teacher, as a reader, as, I guess, a lightweight philosopher. I'm working on who seeks to evolve in wisdom at all times. Every time I walk through those things, I'm taking in more lessons about myself, about my history, about my culture, about my ancestry. And so if you cannot affect what you need from the brick and mortar classroom, there are some lessons until you get on the backside. There are so many things that I grew up in a community that was mixed, right? And we knew that there were some issues that went on in our community. But as an adult, I understand a lot more things going on that I did not understand when I was growing up. And so we have to allow life, in my opinion, to always be a classroom because we cannot dismantle those systems that are working properly if we do not understand the ins and outs of them or even the truth about what's going on. Look, when people say there are levels to this, we're talking about almost everything, and there are definitely levels to so, disenfranchisement among people of color, racism. It's not a one-dimensional thing, honey. You are digging down into some stuff because it gets deeper and deeper and deeper down to even when they signed their name on the paper for housing, and it initially said no Negroes can stay here, having to question, well, you have it in print still that no Negroes can stay here. Why all of a sudden would you welcome me?
Yeah.
That was the very beginning when I said our desire as a people to give our kids something different and more and better sometimes would override what could be a danger to us. And they saw it, but they still thought, well, this will be the chance for my kids to have a better opportunity. This will be the chance for my kids to see life on a different level and to get, because honestly, a lot of the black neighborhoods were more than likely not getting brand new houses built, right? So you wanted your kids to see that. But one thing I've learned by looking at a lot of these things is in the present, right? Just because it's shiny and brand new does not always mean it's better. What is the quality that comes with it? And that was a big in the first episode, I was like, just because it's shiny and brand new doesn't always mean it's better. That was a big lesson I gained. And so in even being a parent, right? Teaching my child every day about quality versus quantity, about the quality of something versus the appearance of something was a huge lesson I saw right when they first opened the movie at the beginning. And these people, when we see the and in part of it, they were trying to escape trauma, definitely. They were running from the unfortunate sexual assault and murder of their small child. And we could talk about the murder of the firstborn and how that's symbolic because it was of the last child and how it was symbolic because he was a boy. And I thought that even that was strategically done because it symbolizes how the destruction of the black male has continued to break apart families. Because what happened to that child literally tore them apart emotionally and psychologically. And if you fast forward to where we are today, and we talk about so many issues that deal with family, every time there is an attack on the black male or our black men being in prison at larger rates, or false convictions. Every time we hear about a false conviction, it's usually a black man. Over 90% of false convictions are black men. So when I saw that image and realized it was a black male child, not a black female child, I even feel that they chose that a male child for a reason because that baby symbolized what the loss of a black male, even as a baby, can do to a family, right? What he meant to his father, what he meant to his mother, and how that was the only one. Well, the daughters could carry on the name should they not be married, but what typically, generationally speaking, the son is usually the one that's identified as being the one who carries on the family's name. So, there were just so many just intricate parts of it. And I think that's it when I talked about how I felt like I was watching a newly written Toni Morrison book over and over again. Just so many intricate parts of the story. Even when we got toward the end where we see the black mama go to the psych ward, and the minute they pull the black mother out the house, everybody goes crazy. Daddy goes crazy. The kids lose it. I mean, everybody, and it is not until she comes back home that balance in the home is able to be restored. She's able to bring her husband back from the edge. She's able to address the issues that her child has been struggling with. She's able to address the issues that Gracie has been struggling with. Literally in that episode, they show how it was so it really made me emotional because it's a conversation I've had over the years about how the role of a woman is so important, and it's so important for Black women in particular to understand the peace and order that we can bring to our homes. Because regardless of what people say, as a woman, we typically be tend to be, more emotional, and that's just, a lot of times how it goes. We're the more emotional being, right? And so, in many cases, when it comes to our children and our companions, we're able to get that emotional balance back established in the homes. And when I saw that episode, it should be not only should it be symbolically important for a lot of Black women, but it could be very emotionally validating for women who don't understand what their role is, for women who don't understand how important they are in their homes and to their children's and children to their companions. And it can also affirm a need to reevaluate um, how I am contributing or creating a supportive environment within my house. Um, and that was just such a that episode. It did something different to me because um, as I continue to write about Black women, and after writing a book like Trex, where I talk about the necessity of Black women's voices being heard and Black women dealing with the trauma that we've been through in order to move past it, to be better for our families. I mean, it really brought tears to my eyes because her husband was a strong man the whole time. But when his wife had to go to the psych ward, it was like it broke him as well. It shows the power of working as a cohesive unit, but it also shows the necessity of everybody's role in that family. So I think that in this show in particular, there were just so many lessons, not just, it's not one dimensional. And it's important because look, we'll say all the time, I hear people talk all the time about how you don't like sitting in a class. Maybe you weren't a big fan of school. Maybe you weren't a big fan of lectures. But many times we'll watch movies. Many times we'll check out a podcast. And so when we get things like this that offer us something much bigger than just saying entertainment, is yet another reason it's so important. Is you are being provided with lessons that you may not have received otherwise. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was collecting my thoughts while you were speaking. There were two times in this film, and I don't know if this was intentional or maybe this is just me getting my own interpretation of what I saw. And I think that was another beauty of the film, like films like Us and Them, is that you walk away thinking. There are things that you can take from these films that that the writer or the director may have not even realized. As a matter of fact, I watched a interview with Jordan Peele after Us, and some of the people were commenting. It was a YouTube interview, and people were commenting, and the interviewer asked him about it. He was like, I never even thought of it in that terms, but that makes total sense, So, but there were two times in the film that I think the director and the writer showed the destabilization of the Black family. The first time was when they were before they moved, and the father had left with the kids, and she said, "My husband will be home soon." She said, "Well, I know he's gone now." And the other people, the white people, were able to come into his house while he was gone away. And kill the baby and sexually assault her because he wasn't there to protect his family. This is what's happening with mass incarceration. This is what's happening in our communities when we are over policed, when the justice system had failed us because it's inherently flawed, and we're sent to prison. That's one sense in which the family is destabilized. The second sense is when they sent the mother to the psych ward, and then they would not allow the father to come in and visit her. He tried, and the doctor denied him several times. He kept trying, and then she told the mother, they don't want to see you. They don't want anything to do with you. They think you're crazy. And he had been trying the whole time to see her. And yet again, a destabilization, because what happened in the home? Chaos ensued. He wasn't prepared. He wasn't equipped. He didn't have the wherewithal and the ability to manage that house without her being there.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until she broke out and returned that there was some sense of calm and stability. But it makes total sense from an artistic standpoint that with one or the other not being there, there was some sense of destabilization both with the parents and the children. But
Mm-hmm.
this was both
Mm-hmm.
times it was intentional. Both
Mm-hmm.
times it was a situation where it was beyond their control, and still it had an impact on the ability of that family to function properly and to engage in a way that was productive. So I was like, man, that's so real in today's in life now, when you see these fathers being removed from their homes for frivolous things, for example, for marijuana, for
Mm-hmm.
cannabis use,
Which
when you
is not
have.
trying to legalize in every state, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. When you have companies, when you have corporations making millions, now billions of dollars on this industry in other states, and people are still locked up in the state of Louisiana for something in other communities they're using brazenly and never get go to jail behind it.
Non-violent.
So this is unthinkable, but it's intentional as well. Because why aren't there white people use weed as much or more than black folks? Why aren't they disproportionately arrested and in prison for it? Because the intention is the destabilization of these communities. And then they'll point to you and say, now pull yourself up.
Those
It's
bootstraps you don't have.
unconscionable.
Look,
But
those bootstraps you don't have.
yeah, that's why these movies are so important, though. They shed a necessary light
Yeah.
on issues that we would probably otherwise go unsung,
Mhm.
unnoticed.
Yes.
But they're still very much so a reality of today.
There's a documentary called The Uncomfortable Truth, which is one of the best documentaries I have seen to this day. It digs into all of this with stats and data and the deliberate disenfranchisement of Black communities. Um, and it's also why I feel that we have got to handle each other with so much more compassion, because some of us are strong enough. And when I look at that family, they reaffirmed it, right? Because if you think about it, um, the mother did not give up the fight to get back to her family. The father did not give up the fight to reclaim his family. And because neither of them were willing to give up the fight for their family, they did not stop fighting until they were back together. And I feel like they did that on purpose as well. The symbolism of the fight to get back together, and to be united as one, was very, very strong. It's also part of the reason that I thought to myself, this is also why it's so important that we handle each other with care, regardless of the experience of being Black, regardless of what we think, does not have a social class. We may not all experience the same things because we may live in different areas, but understand that, truth be told, the experience of being Black is not according to social class. It may be according to where you reside, but it's not the skin you're in dictates a lot. And so some of us have been fortunate enough to make it to another level because we got it, we understood it, we worked toward it. For some people, it may not have clicked yet. They may not, they may need movies like them and us to show them that there's a different way. We may have seen it in the Cosbys a generation earlier. Folks before them may have seen it in saying, I don't want to be like the family and what's happening. People before them may have seen it during the Harlem Renaissance movement, when you saw Langston Hughes become a phenomenal poet despite the challenges before him. It happens at different times for different people. And so cinema, art, theater has all been important for that very reason. Because the awakenings that we have not been able to get on our own, is still the possibility of it happening for others who are tuning in to this and taking in this information and lesson. I can say firsthand, I tell people all the time, they say, who was one of your greatest influences in your life? I say Oprah Winfrey. They say, why? I said, because I was fascinated as a little girl, growing up in South Louisiana, where being Creole was the hot thing. And I did not look Creole at all, okay? I was chocolate. Light bright was what was right. And everybody, and I felt insecure. I wasn't petite growing up. I wasn't a huge girl, but I wasn't the status quo. And I saw this beautiful dark skinned woman who, one day might have been thin, the next day might have been a little plump, but she was tackling subjects that people didn't always want to talk about. She had people from all walks of life on her show. She had people all over the world chanting her name. And she started out in Mississippi, broke, dusty, dirty. She had had struggles, but she looked just like me. And she was chocolate just like me. And she wasn't super petite. And she was talented and she had gifts. And I watched her over and over again. And I started listening to her lessons and I listened to the things she said. And the more I listened, the more I was like, man, if Oprah can do that, I think I can. I think I can do what I want to do too. And I didn't even want to, per se, have the Oprah Winfrey show, but I was like, whatever it is I want to do. If Oprah said she beat this, I can beat it too. But that's the power of it, right? Representation alone makes a difference.
Yeah, yeah,
it makes a difference.
absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I like about her in general is that she's unapologetic about the direction she goes in with her business. Matter of fact, they asked because she was opening schools for girls in Africa, and some of the critics and people that would never have the amount of money that she has says, why aren't you because most of your critics are people that can never do what you do. Your biggest critics are people that have no chance, and they're envious of your ability. They're envious of your talent. I'm on one. They are envious of your talent. They're envious of your ability, and they can never in a million years do what you do. So the best thing they can do is criticize what they wish they could do. But anyway, so they asked her, well, how come you don't build schools in America? And she said, whose money is this? She told them, this is my money and I do what I want to do with it. When you get the money I have, then you build your school in America. I said, you a real one.
I love it.
You as real as they come. But I think sometimes you have to be that unapologetic about your message. All the time. You must always be that unapologetic about who you are, about your message, about where you stand. Because, like I said, these people who don't have a chance of having the level of brilliance and intelligence and abilities that you have will try to drag you down to where they are. Mm-hmm. So it's important to always stand your ground and speak what you know and be sure about that and be unwavering about that, because people will they'll try you. They will try you, and it's almost always people. And there's a difference between negativity and constructive criticism.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Constructive criticism has the purpose of building you up. Negativity has the purpose of tearing you down. And you have to be able, and most times you can distinguish the two from the spirit in which it was delivered.
Yes.
But you can definitely tell the difference because constructive criticism is never telling you what you quote unquote doing wrong or what you need to do. It's always giving you tips on what you are doing to build you up and say, hey, have you considered doing this? Maybe you can do this thing. But negativity is always about what you shouldn't be doing, what you can't do, what you ought to do, how you should, and it's nonsense in most cases, because if you look at the credentials of the people that are bringing it, they are not qualified to criticize in most cases. So I reject negativity. I'll hear constructive criticism because no one is above being teachable, or they shouldn't be above being teachable and being moldable. But I reject negativity wholeheartedly. And I
Right.
always know the difference from the spirit in which it comes, from who it comes, and the spirit in which it's delivered.
Yes.
So I
Look,
think just as a culture, we have to be very mindful of that, because we can be our own worst enemies. And the movie covers that. Oh man, this movie is so brilliant. It covers how we can be our own worst enemy. We can be our own critics, and we don't need that. We have enough to fight.
we'll have to go to a part two on that because
Yes.
that phrase tends to strike my nerve. But we would have to go to a part two on that. You would
What strikes the
definitely,
nerve? What strikes the nerve?
when we say we are our own worst enemy. And it's just because I feel that the trauma we've been through has really broken so much within us that it is a rebuilding process. Um, that is not easy, you know. And I think so often that there's also that part of us that's just human, like other people. That there are individuals that do some of the same malicious things that I've had people who don't look like me do. So I try not to hold it to a different standard. But on the same token, I have had experiences where because we look alike, that has been some of the issue. But is it because you're angry with me or because you're just frustrated that you haven't been able to break through the trauma that all of us have had to deal with? So me and that phrase, we go some
You
places.
know what? I honestly wasn't even thinking of it in terms of people on the outside. I was thinking we can be our own worst enemy in terms of
Uh,
how we criticize ourselves. So I should have said I can be my own worst enemy.
okay.
The self doubt,
Uh,
and of course, a lot of this is brought on sometimes by things that are external. But I forgot what it's called, but it's a thing where you don't believe you belong. I forgot. It's a name for it. You don't believe you're worthy. You don't believe you're smart enough to be in the room you're in.
yeah.
Um, but it's got a name for it, and I can't think of it right now. But like it basically you convince yourself that you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not worthy to walk in the circles that you're in, when really you're probably the smartest one in the room. You're probably the most qualified. You're probably overqualified to be where you are, but you've convinced yourself. And that's what I meant when I said sometimes, but we can be our own worst enemy. And I can be my own worst enemy individually. And that is only compounded by the outside forces of people that try to assure you that your self doubt is accurate.
Yeah.
If you're,
You're talking about imposter syndrome. That's what you were talking about as well.
huh?
Imposter syndrome.
That's it. That's what it is. Imposter syndrome. That's what it's called. Yes. Um, but that's what we many
Yeah.
of us, and again, this is passed down trauma. This is passed down inferiority.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we've been told, you don't belong at this Ivy League school. You
Mhm.
don't belong as the CEO of this Fortune 500 company. You'll never be this, or you'll never be that. We'll never get to the presidency, and now the vice presidency as a woman, a black woman.
Yes. Yep.
And then we convince ourselves that this is the reality, and we're tied down to that belief system.
Yeah.
And now we have to break that cycle, because we'll pass it down to our kids.
Yes. Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Well, I would say this has been an amazing night. We have hit the 8:30 mark.
yeah,
Yeah, look, and I told him when we got started, I say, when I tell people, but he was look, Antoine was already prepared because I was like, I'll tell people up to an hour and a half, and I'll say up to an hour and a half, and then I hit an hour and a half, and people are like, wait, it's over. And he was already prepared for how fast the time goes.
yeah, yeah.
I want to thank you for such an amazing and meaningful conversation tonight. It has been so fulfilling, emotionally charging, uh, deep, necessary, important, relevant, all of that. to us. And I can't wait to continue to put the replays out there so people can tune in and share their feedback as well, because there's so many people that need to hear this, because the media plays such a big part of our lives. And so also being intentional about what we're taking in is one of the things I got tonight. What are we, and when we take in that information, how are we using it? Because that's a thing as well. You can take the information in, but if you don't use it for good, then it can also be destructive to you. And so this was such an amazing conversation, which I knew that anyway. When we had our first phone conversation, I think we ended up on the phone for about an hour and a half. And I was like, oh, it's going to go down when we have the discussion. And
Yeah,
so today has been nothing short of, honestly, an amazing opportunity to talk about a great topic. And I know we could go on and on.
yeah.
So don't be surprised if I bother you again in the future.
It won't be a bother. I'm looking forward to part two. I'm looking
I
forward
want
to it. And I need one of those shirts too, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. So we do have the Black Intellectualism tea, and I'll actually send you the link to get your tea. And we do have these available. The black is $20 for all of you, all the way up to extra large. And then of course we have the green now, which is the limited edition. We'll do 50 of those, and those start at 35. I did not know they would sell so fast, but they are a hit, and people are ordering left and right. So if you're interested in getting your t-shirt, please message me. I will also be putting the link in the comments. I'm so thankful to you all for getting on board with the movement, and how excited. Somebody told me that this weekend they were at an event and somebody had their Black Intellectualism t-shirt on. So I was so excited. So thankful to see how everybody's getting on board with this conversation. You guys, I've been blessed with some great opportunities that are coming about. And honestly, I had no idea. At this point, we've been on this movement right at 90 days. You could not have told me that the conversations would take off so quickly. I have some really awesome lessons lined up. I've had some people contact me about some wonderful opportunities that have really just shocked me. And it's even encouraged people to check out more of my writings on my blog and things like that. People have been getting their copies of Trek. Thank you so much for that. So I'm so excited and blessed for these opportunities, and the way that it is enlarging the territory for more people to hear about the mission of these conversations, which is honestly not about me. It's a greater mission. I'm just doing, in the words of Dr. King, I'm just doing the Lord's will and what I have loved and enjoyed doing for a long time, and working to make all of my dreams come true, and hopefully being a part of seeing your dreams come true. So I thank you guys for getting on board with this, for joining these conversations, for being so excited. People have messaged me saying, hey, if I can ever be a part of the discussion panel, let me know. I am so honored. I think it's essential that we continue to push intellectualism, and share the knowledge that Black people have with everybody. Just because this is called the Black Intellectualism Movement, it is not isolatedly about Black folks only. It's about the fact that we have always been the gift, the pride, the support, the caregivers, the fixers for the world, and just creating a place where people get to meet even more awesome people who look like us, who are changing the world, and bringing us to one place to have these conversations. So thank you. I'm going to close tonight. I didn't know what to do, but I'm going to do All American Girl. And the reason I decided to do that one is because I think at the end of the day, what we're talking about is how to ensure that Black representation and Black people have a place where we are being shown in America, in the American way. Regardless of what people say, we've been here long enough to know that we are just as entitled to anything else, and that includes representation, opportunities, love, and support as anyone else. The media is one of the strongest places where we can see the presence of Black people in a meaningful way, in a positive way, and in a way that will help society continue to make the right type of changes and move forward. And so when we talk about identity, I think it's important that we look at ourselves as the Americans, right? That if anybody is a part of the culture of this country, it is in fact us. So tonight's poem is going to be the All American Girl, okay? Land of the free and home of the brave. Just the thought sometimes gets me enraged. The land that my forefathers worked to build is firmly planted on the soil that my ancestors tilled. Instead of using violence to let my fury unfurl, I denounce your accusation. I am the all American girl. The most eloquent scientists and mathematicians are a part of me, but I am the hidden part of America's history. No one wants to talk about the lynchings or the back seats of the bus. Instead, we get a one sided story told about us. Americanism is about baseball and handmade apple pies. Well, Jackie Robinson changed the face of the game, and Big Mama makes soul food the best soul food money can buy. This revelation might not be as shocking as it seems, but you don't have to be white to live the all American dream. The lie that has been sold is that the black man lacks a sense of authentic connection. But as hard as my ancestors tilled and built, we should all have the American heritage infection. Spend no more time wondering from whence you came. The fact that we descended from those enslaved should bring you no shame. I could have been born anywhere across this great world, but I thank God that I was born the all American girl. And I hope that tonight's discussion has solidified the idea that we have a place in this country, that we are significant. Our ancestors have toiled and worked and made vast contributions to make this country what it is today. And so when we look at cinema and movies, it's not based on what other people depict us to be, but how we in fact should see ourselves and what we should believe about ourselves, which is the best. And so when we talk about what Americanism looks like, it looks like every single person who is here in this country each day working hard, making a difference, and trying to establish a life that is based on happiness, love, and support for your family. And when we talk about Black people, there is no longer a need for us to feel that we are out of place in this country. We are exactly where we are supposed to be, and we are a representation of America. Is there anything else you wanted to say tonight, Antoine?
No, that was incredible. I think you summed it up perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a fantastic rest of the week, and we'll see you next week when we talk with Miss Lakeisha Pruitt about how to make your money work for you. Good night.